In today's video, I'm going to go through and discuss every single side quest for the Tribunal expansion featured in the Elder Scrolls 3 Morrowind. In total, there are 19 of them, and they span across the multiple playable districts within Mournhold. The facts and information provided today are brought to you by the game itself and are supplemented with the unofficial Elder Scrolls pages. The first quest for today is titled Bouncer. This one begins in the God's Reach district. By entering inside of the Winged Guar and seeking out the Altmer named Hessian, she has a proposition for the player. She asks how she can help you, if you'd like a bed for rent, or perhaps to help her out with a little bit of work. Inquiring about the latter, she tells you that her bouncer didn't show up today. She asks if you'd be willing to temporarily step in for him. All you need to do is a quick sweep of the bar crowd. Agreeing to do it, her only instructions are to go and speak with everyone in the tavern. If they're too drunk, unruly, or shady, they need to be thrown out. Making the rounds, the first NPC you may come across is a Bosmer named Denegor. Speaking with him, he's slurring his words and accuses you of harassing him. He then blurts out that you're always causing problems. Running with that prompt, he says that he's never met a Breton that he's liked, which in this case is the race of my character. He declares that we should all be shipped back to wherever we came from and that a wall should be built in between us. The player is then prompted with telling him to calm down or telling him to leave. If his disposition is low, the former results in Denegor insulting you even more. Otherwise, if it's above 75, he'll relax and settle down. By offering to escort him out though, he refuses to follow you and thinks you're going to trick him. He then becomes even more unruly and a fight breaks out. Denegor fights with his fists and the game prompts you to do the same. Fighting with a weapon results in a prompt from Hessian saying that he should be knocked out and not killed. After doing so, Denegor falls to the ground, unconscious, and your journal is updated. Continuing with the rounds, most of the other guests you speak to are under control and right-minded. Among this bunch of NPCs though would have been the Nord Holmar. If the player hadn't done Wood Elf with a Grievance yet, which is a quest that will soon be discussed, the Nord would have to be taken care of. Other than that, the only other questionable character is a Dwemer named Galm Celis. He asks if you're up for a game of shells. Humoring him, he explains the rules of the game, with promises to double your money if you win. Deciding to give it a go, you can bet 100, 500, or 1000 gold. Choosing any amount, Celis takes your money and mixes up the shells. No matter what though, by the end of it, he'll tell you that you lost and asks if you want to play again. By speaking to any of the other NPCs in the tavern regarding the latest rumors, they'll say that Galms is a hustler fresh out of Vardenfell. He's trying to distance himself from his reputation, but word travels fast. Confronting Celis about this, he'll frustratedly come clean and ask for some sort of forgiveness. He promises to give gamblers fair odds if you let him stay. He even says that players can report him to Hessian if they suspect foul play. Forced to accept the offer, I personally attempted to gamble again and I still lost to Galms. To be honest though, I wasn't sure if the game was still rigged or if I just had bad luck. Regardless, after that, the player can return to the Altmer, who asks if all of the problems have been taken care of. Telling her yes, she summarizes your work, thanks you for your efforts, and gifts you 1000 gold. Thus ending the quest, Bouncer. The next quest is titled The Matchmaker. This one begins with the player happening across a Dwemer woman named Morena Gilnith in the Great Bazaar. Speaking with her, she mentions that she can't talk as she must devote her time to working. There's no time to dwell on her higher fantasies like meeting someone new. Running with that dialogue prompt, she goes over her life story. Morena tells you how she grew up somewhere else in a loving home, but was forced to marry someone she didn't want to. She fled the situation, ended up in Mournhold, and has been working here ever since. She wanted to prove to her family that she could support herself and meet a potential suitor at the same time. However, since coming to the city, money's been tight and she's only had time to work. Morena then asks if you know of any single men to set up with her. There are 3 possible bachelors to send her way, the first of which is right here in the Great Bazaar. Fons Baron can be found on the opposite end of Morena, and speaking with him, he shares with you his love for women. He says he can't get enough of them and that he's looking for a quote-unquote saucy wench that can satisfy him. The player can bring up the idea of setting him up with Morena. Fons doesn't know of her but decides to go along with it anyways, citing that there's no way she'll be able to resist him. Returning to Morena and letting her know that you found someone for her, she tells you that she's a bit nervous about this whole ordeal. She needs to leave work for a bit in order to go on this date, so if it goes wrong, she says she'll never forgive you. You tell her to have faith in your matchmaking abilities, and you're presented with a list of all of the bachelors you spoke with. When Fawns is brought up, Gilnith thinks you're kidding. The player insists that they're serious, and Morena has a small freak-out moment, saying that she's heard stories about him and that you better be right about this decision. Returning to Fawns, he continues to present his arrogant womanizer side. You can tell him that Morena wants to meet for a date, to which he responds that she'll be swooning as soon as she sees him. By going into the Morena Gilnith prompt one more time, you'll be presented with 3 different pieces of advice to offer Fawns. One is to tell him that he should stop talking about himself and that he should listen more to her. This gives increased odds that the date will go well. Another is to tell him that he should be himself, and that puts the odds at no better than a coin flip. Lastly, you can tell him that he should share stories of all his past conquests with other women. This one drastically decreases the success rate. Whichever one the player picks, Fawns will go on his way, and after a 48-hour period, the date will have came and went. Morena will be absent from her usual spot during those times, but once the date is over and she's returned, she'll have a verdict for you. If it went well, she'll be happy to see you again and will thank you for setting her up with a suitor. You can even speak with the men after all is said and done, and some of them might have a reward for you, just not Fawns though. The next potential bachelor is a Dwemer named Govel Raylan in the Temple District. Govel has some confidence issues, but is really excited to meet with Morena. Morena has never heard of him before, but decides to give it a chance, hoping him to be an exciting and out there kind of guy. When telling Govel that Gilnith wants to meet him for a date at the Winged Guar, he expresses his nerves and asks what he should do. The option that leads to the most probable outcome for success is to give him money for some new clothes and to tell him to stop acting so starry-eyed. Like before, the two of them will go on their date, and if it went well, Morena will be happy and thankful that you set them up together. Govel will be equally as cheery and gift you the Raylan family belt, which fortifies both personality and speechcraft for 5 points. The last potential bachelor you can approach is Sunohlas, the trader in the Great Bazaar. When first speaking with him, he's quite nihilistic in his beliefs, specifically saying that love doesn't matter. Raising his disposition and prying a little further, he tells the story of how he took his late wife to Vardenfell in search of an adventure. She quickly caught blight though and passed away soon after. Now, he doesn't believe that any woman could ever replace her. Bringing up Morena Gilnith as a potential match for him, he's skeptic and dismissive of it at first, but decides to go along with it. Morena knows Sunil's name but can't put a face to him, again saying that she's trusting the player's judgment. When offering advice for Hlas, the option with the most potential for success is to tell him to not be depressed and to think optimistically for a change. After 2 full days, you'll know that the date went well if Morena isn't seen at her usual spot. She'll now be spending her time in the upper level of the traders. Sunil, overjoyed with his newfound love, will gift you the weapon of the Bipolar Blade. It's a 2-handed sword and has the enchantments of Frenzy Humanoid for 30 points and Calm Humanoid for 30 points. It's also an artifact that can be sold to the museum, which is something that's touched upon in just a bit. Of course, worth mentioning is that if the date goes bad, Gilnith completely shuts you out, saying that she no longer wants anything to do with you. With that, thus ends the quest, the Matchmaker. The next quest for today is titled the Champion of Clutter. This one begins in the Craftsman's Hall of the God's Reach district. By ascending to the 2nd floor and going into one of the side rooms, the player will come across an NPC named Detritus Karya. Karya is quite the intriguing man, and he'll right away ask you if you'd like to see his collection of clutter. He's seemingly obsessed with utensils, silverware, appliances, and cups/containers of all kinds. Karya thinks that you can help him with completing his collection. Inquiring about it, he mentions that he needs the service of an adventurer to procure a few more pieces. Agreeing to help him, his first request is for you to find a bolt of Imperial rat hair fabric, as well as a brushed silver pitcher. The names are a bit of a red herring, as the items are simply a silver pitcher and a red bolt of cloth. The unofficial Elder Scrolls pages suggests acquiring the pitcher through the pawnbroker at the Great Bazaar. As for the bolt of cloth, the clothier has them on display in her shop. They are fairly easy to steal depending on the angle the player is standing at. Both items in hand, you can return back to Karya and give them over. He thanks you and rewards you with 300 gold. Asking about his collection again, he gives you a new list of items to acquire. Detritus asks for a redware pot, a complete set of silverware, and a yellow plate. Again, according to the unofficial wiki, some convenient ways to acquire these items include buying the redware pot from the trader in the Great Bazaar. As for the silverware, many manors and homes have them locked away in chests. Valus Manor is secured by a level 100 lock, but if you manage to get in, there are several small containers that have multiple sets in them. Otherwise, Vodunius Nuccius' home in Seranin has some for the taking. Lastly, the yellow plate is easiest to pick up back on Vardenfell. The trader in Caldera, Varric Germain, has more than a few of them for sale. Once all items have been acquired and Caria is returned to, he'll once again be ecstatic and reward you with 500 gold. Inquiring about his collection one more time, he'll give you one final task. He asks for a complete dwarven set of 2 goblets, one bigger than the other, a pitchard, a tankard, and a large bowl. If you've completed the quest, Attack on Mournhold, the Dwemer ruins of Bom's Amshend are opened up to you. Delving within, you'll locate every single piece of dwarven craftsmanship. This is the only stretch in the quest where combat may be necessary to progress. Most of the items can be found in the King's Walk zone of the ruin. Once all have been procured, you can run back to Caria and he'll be ever thankful for your services. He names you the Champion of Clutter and rewards you with 2,000 septums, thus ending the quest, the Champion of Clutter. The next quest for today is titled Scroll Sales. This one begins with the player entering inside of the pawnbrokers within the Great Bazaar. Speaking with the proprietor, Ten Tongues Weirhat, he welcomes you and says that this is where you can find the best deals on goods. As well, there are a lot of special offers on items. Inquiring about those offers, Weirhat says that every so often he'll have massive bargains on goods, and that you should check back often to learn about any new deals. In fact, today's deal is a brand new scroll of Ilnia's Breath. Asking why the scroll is so cheap, Ten Tongues flounders for a bit and dismisses the question. He rolls his eyes at everyone who asks why these prices are so cheap and calls out someone by the name of Anya before immediately backtracking. Pressing him on this Anya, he comes clean and says that she's a Khajiit whom he meets with in the sewers. She gives him goods to sell, and he does it because he feels threatened by her. Delving into the sewers beneath the Great Bazaar, Anya can be found right by the entrance. Approaching her, she asks what you want from her. The player can bring up 10 tongues, and Anya becomes immediately hostile. She blames Weirhat for saying too much, and says that both of you need to be silenced. The Khajiit fights with a glass dagger, and after she's defeated, the player can pick up a note that was right beside her. It's written by Weirhat, and he's complaining about not being able to move a book that she gave to him. He remarks that if he holds onto the book any longer, people will start to get suspicious. Returning back to the pawnbroker and confronting him, the player can tell him about Anya, to which he begins to panic. He doubles down that she was the supplier for all of the special offers. Ten Tongues hands over the book that was mentioned in the note, citing that no one can read it nor wants to buy it from him. He's unsure where it came from or how Anya got it. Looking at the book, there's a blurb saying that the symbols and calculations are indecipherable, but one thing that is legible is the signature belonging to Elbert Nearmark. Elbert can be located at the Craftsman Hall in the upper section level. Speaking with him about the stolen book, he's shocked to see it again and asks for it back. Handing it over, he comments how much work went into it and thanks you for returning the book to him. His disposition increases and he offers the player a small discount on any of his goods. With that, thus ends the quest, Scroll Sales. The next quest for today is titled Crimson Plague. This one begins with the player down in the Temple Gardens portion of the sewers. Whether for exploration purposes or in order to complete the Shrine of the Dead, the player may steer to the western side of the zone and come across a sealed door leading into Gedna Relvil's tomb. Getting past its level 50 security, as soon as the player steps foot inside, you're hit with an in-game message. It tells you that there's an overwhelming rancid stench nearby. It's not the smell of the dead though, but rather something else that's in here. Strangely, by looking around the tomb, nothing presents itself and the area is rather empty. Choosing to leave and return topside, the player can approach Mera Halas, who has some interesting information. There's a rumor going around surrounding a strange new disease. One of the temple's healers, Neril Endarin, believes it has to do with rats. Halas says that someone of your abilities can really help out the community, and she directs you over to her in the temple's Hall of Ministry. Seeking out Endarin, she opens up by saying that while several people have gotten sick, it's hardly the epidemic many believe it to be. Asking for a small favor, Neril wants a cure disease potion brought over to Gian Aline in God's Reach. He's apparently ill but doesn't want to visit the temple directly. Taking the bottle and rushing it over to the Breton, he thanks you for the delivery and sends regards to Neril. Upon your return to the Hall of Ministry, the player will find it's been overrun by rats. Exterminating the vermin, you can speak again with Andarin, and she'll go back on her word from before. She believes it to be a much more serious problem. The Ordinators won't let anyone inside of the temple out of fear for spreading the disease. There's a man outside, Athelin Malice, who needs healing, and Darin asks you to go and bring a potion of cure disease to him, as she would like to stay here and study the rats. Quickly running outside, Malice can be found wandering just outside of the doors. He screams in frustration that he's not being led into the temple, even though he's sick. Handing him the bottle, he scoffs at the idea that they'd rather him self-administer his medicine. Regardless though, he takes the cure and leaves. Returning back to Andarin, she reveals that the source of this epidemic is the Crimson Plague, a disease that was last seen in the Second Era. It spreads rapidly and is rather deadly. She asks the player to look into its reappearance and suggests starting in the sewers, as that's where the rats are coming from. Descending to the basement, you'll witness a strange sight. There's a Khajiit standing over a knockdown Ordinator. Approaching the Khajiit, she quickly introduces herself as Shinari and says that she has information to share. The Ordinator saw Shinari emerge from the sewers, and in an act of quick thinking, she knocked him out. The Khajiit tells you that she witnessed you leaving Revel's tomb. She entered after you were gone in hopes of finding treasure. In turn though, she was infected with the Crimson Plague and fears that she doesn't have long. In exchange for more information, Shinari tells you to meet her by the tomb and asks you to heal her illness with a spell or scroll, as she doesn't trust potions. Returning to Andarin, she knows exactly who Shinari is, saying to keep your voice down, as the Khajiit is a wanted thief. Neril knows of her distaste for potions and hands you a scroll of Credit's Panacea. Rushing through the sewers and arriving back in the Temple Garden Zone, Shinari can be found standing just outside the doors leading to the temple shrine. Speaking with her once more, she asks to be healed right away. After doing so, she reveals information regarding Gedna Relvil. While Shinari was inside of the tomb, she found a corpse in a coffin. The corpse stood up and began attacking her. It told her that it was Gedna Relvil, and that it was here to spread the Crimson Plague. Shinari says that this all started because the player was the one to open Relvil's tomb. She suggests that the plague can be taken care of once and for all if the Lich Gedna is killed. Apparently, there's a secret passageway inside of the tomb that Shinari saw Gedna go through, only she doesn't know how it works. Entering back inside of the crypt, there are a few rats inhabiting the space now. Shortly after the entrance, the player can follow the Khajiit's directions and stumble across the passageway. By stepping on an out-of-place rock, it acts as a pressure plate which unseals the stone doors. On the other side is a small garrison of skeletons that will begin to attack the player. Once they're taken care of, you can progress through the passageway and enter inside of a medium-sized chamber. Here, there'll be a few more rats and skeletons to take out. At the back of the room, the player will spot the Lich, Gedna Relvil. Upon her noticing you, powerful casts of destruction magic will be let off in your direction. Getting in close, Relvil threatens the player, saying that because you dare cross the threshold, you will now be the first one to die. Before the conversation comes to an end, she promises that the Crimson Plague and armies of undead will sweep the lands. As mentioned before, Relvil has powerful spells that can pack a big punch if they land. There are a variety of strategies that can be utilized in order to defeat her. For example, if the player's character is speedy, her attacks aren't too difficult to time and dodge. She takes some time in between casts, and from there, her health can be whittled down through melee or ranged attacks. Once Gedna is defeated, her corpse can be looted. She holds the Robe of the Lich, which has the power to drain health for 600 points on self, yet fortify magicka for 300 points on self. The robe can be sold to the museum for a hefty sum of gold. Once done, the player can return back to Neril and Darin. She tells you that they've managed to curb the spread of the disease, and that Mournhold is thankful for your service. As a reward, she grants you the greater power of Grace of Almsylvi, which restores health for 30 to 80 points, restores fatigue for 60 to 100 points, and cures the common disease, thus ending the quest, Crimson Plague. The next quest is titled Dwemer Warbots. This one begins with the player venturing into Ignatius Flaccus's manor in Godsreach. Descending into his basement section, you'll come across the Imperial standing before a force field of some kind. Just beyond it are some broken down and destroyed Dwemer machines. When speaking with Ignatius, he comments on how you've likely come here for the robot arena. He mentions though that since his bots are out of commission, there won't be any fights for a bit. That is, unless you can help him. Getting the scoop, Ignatius says that he's enchanted the bots to fight with one another. At this point though, they're so worn down that he needs new parts for them. Agreeing to help, he asks that you recover 10 pieces of Dwemer scrap metal. If the ruins of Bomb's Amshend are accessible to the player, this task should be no problem. Down in the Dwemer stronghold, there are many Centurions that you can fight against. You're likely to find some Dwemer scraps along the way. They can also be located around the rooms that contain creations, experiments, and crafting apparatus. Important to note that each piece of scrap has a weight of 10, so make sure you have at least 100 pounds of space cleared for them. Once all 10 have been obtained, you can return back to Flatchus. He thanks you and takes them for his repairs. He then asks of one more favor for the Warbot repairs. He wants you to retrieve 3 Dwemer cogs. Similar to the scraps, these can be found down in Bomb's Amshend, and there's an entire room full of them in the Hall of Winds section. Something to note though is that these pieces have a weight of 50 each, so either clear some space in your inventory or, as cleverly suggested by the unofficial wiki, cast Mark right in front of Flatchus and then recall back to him as soon as all 3 cogs have been obtained. Handing them over, he once again thanks you for your efforts and tells you to come back in a bit. Leaving his home and coming back inside, the Dwemer Warbots will be active and ready to go. Ignatius asks if you'd like to make a friendly wager on the outcome. You get to pick between the Spherebot and the Steam Centurion. Then, he'll ask how much you'd like to put down, saying that if you win, you get double back. I personally placed 50 down on the Spherebot. Immediately, I regretted my decision though, as I had it confused with the Centurion Archer. I watched the slow, painful match of the Warbots, and ultimately lost in the end, thus ending the quest, Dwemer Warbots. The next quest is titled Robot Arena. This one is sequential with the previous one, and occurs just after leaving Ignatius's home. If the player runs by a Dwemer woman named Vanessa Serrano, she may comment on just how big of a fan she is for the Robot Arena. Speaking with her, she asks if you've ever been there. She says that she used to go there quite frequently, but slowed down due to the Warbots being broken. Now that they're up and running again, she tried to visit Flatchus, but his door was locked and she heard strange noises coming from inside. She ends by saying that she fears for his safety. Returning back to Ignatius's manor, you can pop the lock with a spell or lockpick and enter inside. Descending down to the basement area, you'll see from a distance that the force field is gone, and the Dwemer Warbots are roaming freely. Getting in too close, they'll aggro onto you, forcing your hand at wiping them out. If your character is somewhat skilled at combat, the fight shouldn't be too difficult. I found it easiest to hold them at a choke point, so say the doorway and have them approach one by one. You'll encounter Steam Centurions, spiders, and spheres. Flatchus will be standing in the corner of his workshop. If you're able to make it to him before dealing with the Warbots, he'll tell you that they must be deactivated. Once they're all destroyed, you can return to him and he'll thank you for saving his life. He hands you a reward of 1,000 gold and claims he needs to start on the repairs right away, thus ending the quest, Robot Arena. The next quest for today is titled A Star is Born, and it begins in the Great Bazaar district of Mournhold. Entering within the marketplace area, the player is likely to see a stage of sorts in its center. Snooping around the structure, you'll see multiple NPCs standing at its base, with a Dwemer woman on the stage itself and a Dwemer man just behind it. The spectators all say the same bit of dialogue, wondering when the play is going to start. Approaching the woman on stage, Guerrerin Selvalo, she says that you'd probably want to speak with Marin backstage, as he's in charge of this whole production. Intrigued, you make your way back there and speak with the Dwemer. He greets you and introduces himself as the founder of the Mournhold Players. The team was supposed to put on a show today, The Horror of Castle Zur, but unfortunately, the show can't go on due to some issues. Inquiring about them, Marin says that their lead actor, Tarvis Belith, came down with collywobbles and they haven't found anyone to take his part. Marin himself said he would do it, but he's needed backstage. He remarks that they just haven't been able to find anyone who looks similar to Tarvis. This is when Marin gets an idea. Apparently your character, regardless of age, race, or sex, looks pretty spot on to Tarvis, and Marin offers you the lead role of Captain Clavides in the Imperial Guard. Choosing to accept this offer, he's ecstatic and hands you the script for the horror of Castle Zur. He says that you only have 2 minutes to review it, and that you must report back to him on time for the show. The script is actually incredibly lengthy. In total, there are 30 pages, and 28 of them are pretty much solely lines, with your character being involved in about 90% of it. From my personal experience, I began to read the script pretty intensely, soon resorting to taking pictures of every single page in the book. Once satisfied, the player returns back to Marin in a timely manner. He tells you to just go on through from the door in front of you and stand on the mark. He notes though that any mistakes made in the play will be penalized. Exiting the conversation and stepping into the spotlight, you begin your big break.
Good evening to you, Sergio.
Choosing only the correct lines, you say, "Good evening, is your master at home?"
No, Sergio, it's only me here. My master, Sadurakana Talvani Hordalf Seer, is at his winter estate. Is there something I can do for you?
You respond, "Possibly, would you mind if I came in?"
Not at all, Sergio. Please, may I offer you some flint?
You tell her, "No thank you, what's your name?"
Anara, Sergio.
You ask her when her master left for Skathanud.
More than a fortnight ago. That's why it's only me in the castle, Sergio. All the other servants and slaves who tend to his lordship travel with him. Is there something wrong?
You ask if she knew of an Ashlander named Sol Karifa.
No, Sergio, I know no one by that name.
You tell Anara that he's dead, and his last words were Castle and Zur.
Vec? That's strange. I suppose it's possible that my master knew this man, but being an Ashlander and my master being of the House of Telvanni, well, if you'll pardon me for being flippant, Sergio, I don't think they would be friends.
You ask if you could look into her master's library.
Please, Sergio, go wherever you want. We have nothing to hide. We are loyal Imperial subjects.
You respond saying, "As I hear are all Telvanni." At this point, one of the men from the crowd comes rushing up onto the stage, weapon in hand. My first time round, he caught me by surprise, as I had none of my equipment ready, and honestly, assumed this was part of the play. He ultimately killed me, and I had to restart the quest. The second time round, I equipped all of my gear, and took on Dravel and Drano. My Daedric Spear was rough in condition, which I didn't realize whilst fighting, so the kill took longer than expected. Dravel was stuck in a running animation by the door, so I was able to cheese my way to victory. An interesting and ironic note, as pointed out by the unofficial Elder Scrolls pages, is that the joke of all House Telvanni being Imperial supporters apparently is always a hoot, and the crowd loves it regardless of political views. You'll see in just a second that this occurrence was the pattern breaker. Once Dravel is defeated, the player can return to Marin, and he admits to knowing that an assassin would strike against the production sooner or later. He explains that Tarvis, the lead actor out with Collywobbles, had a fling with the daughter of a Telvanni diplomat. They were caught by said diplomat, and ever since then, they knew an attack on Tarvis's life was imminent. Marin suggests that since you took care of the Morag Tong thug, there likely won't be any more attempts on Tarvis's life. In the end, Marin will recount any mistakes you made during the play, critique your acting skills, and pay you out accordingly, handing over a perfected sum of 2,000 gold and the Amulet of Verbosity. It fortifies Speechcraft for 20 points for 30 seconds when cast. It's a shame that the play didn't get to go on from there though. Reading it further, it's actually a very well put together short story. The long short of it is, the captain continues his search around the house and happens across a secret passage in which he investigates. At the same time, his lieutenant, an Argonian, shows up at the castle and begins to question Anara about her master. The captain returns, frightened, and informs Anara that Hordalf Zur, her master, has dead bodies in the basement, suggesting that he's involved in necromancy. Anara faints, and the two guards hear a knock at the door. It's a delivery from the nearby college, and the contents of the package are letters written back and forth between two people. They detail the means in which they've tortured and killed their victims, to which Olus, the Argonian, pieces together that Master Hordolf isn't the one behind these atrocities. It's his wife, Sidura. Before leaving for safety, Olus addresses Anara as Sidura, in which she responds to, and the jig is up. This was because Sidura was being sent an Argonian victim next to experiment on, and her demeanor when greeting Olus made it suspicious. Before the two men could react and arrest her, the lights go out and all the audience hears from afterwards is Anara. Again, it's a pretty interesting story. With that, thus ends the quest, A Star is Born. The next quest for today is titled Estate Sale. This one begins with the player entering inside of Gian Alien's house in the God's Reach district. Speaking with him, he introduces himself as a collector of fine artifacts. Asking further about his collector side, he says that he's working on finishing a set of very rare daggers. The last one he needs apparently is a Droth dagger. The Droth dagger was hard to track down. It was crafted in the Second Age and made for a group of nobles. Apparently, the recently widowed Arnsa Thaindas is in possession of one, and Gian asks if you'd be willing to help him get it. Accepting the offer, he divulges some information to you. Thaindas' late husband, Sandis, harbored a debt in his later years. After his passing, the debt was left for Arnsa to deal with. Due to financial issues, Gian thinks she'd be more than willing to part with the dagger. He tells you to make haste though, as she's expected to have an estate sale soon. He doesn't want the blade going out for auction. Heading over to Thaindas Manor, Arnsa can be seen pacing around inside. You'll notice Imperial Legionnaire gear placed around the house, likely indicating her late husband served the Empire. Speaking with her right off the bat, she claims that she isn't ready for the estate sale yet. Asking further about it, she wonders if you're here for a particular item, or if you knew her husband. Rolling with the second prompt, you can lie and tell her the two of you served in the Legion together, that you were in the Fighters Guild with each other, or to simply say that you didn't know him. Choosing to lie about being in the Legion with him, she mentions that she's never heard of you before. She appreciates you stopping by, but there's too much for her to do right now. When asked about the particular item, your character will mention the Droth dagger. In a similar tone to the Legion response, she's fairly dismissive of the blade, saying that it could be around somewhere in a chest. There are a few options that can play out from here. The most straightforward of which is to start breaking into her containers. If she sees you, she'll report your crimes. Located in front of a screen on the right hand side of the room is a chest secured with a level 80 lock. Opening it, you'll see the Droth blade, which can now be taken for Gian. The slightly more subtle approach involves raising Arnsa's disposition by a bit. This time, when asked about a particular item, she'll locate the dagger and offer it to you for 600 gold. She explains that it was her husband's and it's a rare item, but frankly, she doesn't want the thing. Funnily enough, she mentions that she refused to sell it to Gian in the past, due to him being quote-unquote a nasty little man. Regardless, buying it off of her is another way to procure the item. The final way of obtaining the dagger is by raising her disposition to beyond 80. Doing so and lying to her about serving with Sandis in the Legion, her demeanor from before changes. She expresses sorrow and thanks you for thinking of him. As a token to remember him by, she says that you can take any item you please. When asked about the Droth dagger, she finds it for you and happily hands it over. Any of these three methods work, and neither of them concern Gian. Returning to the Breton, he'll ask if you've acquired the dagger. There are 4 prompts to choose from. You can either hand it over, keep it, tell him you sold it, or say that you don't have it yet, all of which are valid options to pick. By selecting to hand it over, he thanks you for your efforts and pays you out 800 gold, saying that's way more than the dagger's worth. Thus ending the quest, Estate Sale. The next quest for today is titled Infidelities. This one begins with the player entering inside of the Andoran Manor within God's Reach. Speaking with the Dwemer woman, Deldris, she'll at first be mad at you for barging in, but after, she'll mention that you can actually be of use to her. She asks if you've seen her husband around. Questioning what she means, she says that lately, her husband has been leaving their home late at night and only returns in the morning, if at all. She's worried that she's being cheated on and asks for you to find and follow him. Agreeing to help out, she says that it's best to start looking near the winged guar. Once located, the player should keep their distance so he doesn't suspect something's up. You're to report back with your findings. From my personal experience, I neared the center of God's Reach and spotted a strange man crouching and lurking by the Craftsman Hall. I watched him for a bit to see what he would do, but he kept getting stuck on the upper platform of the establishment. If you get too close, the game will warn you and tell you to distance yourself. After forcing a wait, the mer moved on from his spot and continued round the back of the hall. I got in a bit closer and received a journal update. Apparently, he was speaking with another woman, and they deliberated on agreeing to meet again later. Looking around, you'll spot Velina Saren just behind the Craftsman Hall. By speaking to her, she'll comment on how you've been following Terran around, that you were likely sent by his wife, and ends with her saying that she's going to deal with you. She arms herself, and Terran runs in to defend her. Once both have been killed, the player can return back to Deldris, and she'll have a bit of a freak-out moment. She'll express her shock that Terran's dead, she'll say that she didn't want this to happen, and she'll follow it up with kicking you out of her house. Reverting back to spotting the husband with his mistress, you can report your findings immediately to Deldris. She exclaims that her suspicions were right and curses Terran. She appreciates your help, only wishing that you could have taken care of Velina for her. She hands you the reward of 250 gold. Reverting back once more, this time the player can accost Velina, kill her, leave Terran alive, and report back to Deldris. She'll compliment the way you handled things, mention that she'll deal with Terran when he gets home, and rewards you with 1000 gold. Thus ending the quest, Infidelities. The next quest is titled The Summoner. This one begins with the player happening across an NPC named Drathis Reyes in the Great Bazaar. Speaking with Reyes, he'll ask if you want to hear about the latest rumors. Indulging him, he says that a wicked and powerful wizard with the surname of Velis has moved into town recently. The sorcerer is apparently going to make a public display of power, and Reyes says to be on the lookout for him. Leaving the area and then coming back, if the player were to try and enter inside of the magic shop, Ovis Velis appears and begins to speak. He introduces himself as a great and feared wizard, and vows to bring Mournhold to its knees. He'll specifically pick out the player as someone that he's going to make an example out of. Ovis is relatively weak and can be taken care of with little effort. On his body, you'll find a worn-out key. Speaking once more with Drathis, he'll remark how Ovis certainly wasn't as tough as the rumors made him out to be. He'll then notice the key you picked up and recognize it as the one to Velis Manor in God's Reach. He suggests that you look into it, as it could shed more light on this occurrence. Going over to the manor and entering inside, the player will immediately run into another NPC. This one is Gavis Velis, and he gets straight into business by bringing up his unfortunate brother. Gavis tells you that Ovis often took credit for his achievements and exploits. He agrees that Ovis went too far with his actions, but also notes that retribution is needed for his death. Gavis calls for revenge against the player, but knows that you must defend yourself. Therefore, he calls for a duel and tells you to prepare yourself. Velis fights with a Jink Blade and summons more than a few Daedra to aid him. It's very easy to get trapped if you don't have Magicka resistance or a way to counter the paralysis. Once defeated, the player can loot Gavis for his gear as the reward, thus ending the quest, The Summoner. The next quest for today is titled The Museum. If the player has gone through the main questline and reached the Blade of Nerevar portion, you'll be directed over to Terrassa Arum at the Museum of Artifacts in God's Reach. Otherwise, the museum is an establishment you can simply stumble into on your own time. Terrassa introduces herself as the curator. Asking about the museum, she tells you that it's a self-funded venture, and the goal is to display and collect as many unique, old, and powerful items as possible. She mentions that if you have any items of interest, she'll take a look at them, and if they're a right fit, she'll make an offer. After completing the quest, Helsith's Champion, you receive the Dagger of Samachus, which is one of the artifacts that can be sold. The offers that she makes for your goods are among the best that you'll receive in the game. In total, there are 32 artifacts that can be sold to the museum. At least 2 of them are needed for donation in order to complete the main questline. Among these items are a mix of armor, weapons, and jewelry. A lot of them are difficult to get a hold of, and are pieces or rewards acquired at the end of lengthy and challenging quests or adventures. Some of these include the Helm of Orain Bearclaw, the Mace of Molag Bal, Ebony Mail, Boots of the Apostle, Umbra Sword, and Skull Crusher. If you were to sell every single item desired by the museum, it would net you 693,750 gold, even after the donations to the temple, which could be the cheapest items of the Boots of Blinding Speed and Oriel's Shield. You'd still end up with 685,000 gold. After every donation or sale, the piece that you had just given her can be seen on display throughout the museum. Unfortunately, even if every single artifact was handed over, the quest is never marked as completed and remains in your journal indefinitely, thus ending the quest, the museum. The next quest is titled The Smith's Apprentice. This one begins in the Craftsman Hall of Godsreach. Wandering around, you're likely to come across a man named Ilnori Faustus. Speaking with him, he comes off as rude and pretentious, saying that even though he is a smith's apprentice, he's got nothing to offer to the likes of you. Ilnori says that he doesn't belong here. He's above working away at the forges and continuously insults his master, Bowles. He makes fun of the size of his head, his expressions whilst working, and questions his intelligence. Ilnori calls himself the perfect specimen. His nails, his complexion, the proportions of his body, he says that he was crafted in the image of the gods. Instead of blacksmithing, he says his true calling is to become an adventurer. Inquiring about that, he compares his future journeys with yours, insinuating that due to his looks, charisma, and overall greatness, any opposing forces will tremble before him and surrender. In fact, Ilnori states that he's going to quit his job today and become an adventurer right away. At this point, if you were to leave the hall and come back, Faustus is seemingly gone and can't be located anywhere. Speaking with Bowles Indalin, his former employer, he'll curse Ilnori, saying that he just up and left without saying anything. He sees the silver lining in it, as Ilnori had a bad work ethic, but regardless, Bowles needs a new apprentice. He remarks that if you see an able-bodied person, you should send them his way. If the player ventures inside of the winged Gwar and speaks with a red guard named Théoden, he asks if you'd like to drink with him. Choosing to do so, he goes on about his latest woes. He had his dream job, a pillow maker at a factory. It recently closed down though, and the pillow market has gone downhill. His employer didn't space out their finances enough and overproduced their goods. In the end, Théoden exclaims that he needs to find work. Your character mentions that Bowles is in need of a new apprentice at the Craftsman Hall. Even though it doesn't involve pillows, Théoden decides to give it a go and thanks you for telling him about it, handing you a Cyrodiilic brandy out of appreciation. Returning back to the hall, the player will spot the Red Guard in his new role. He says he just imagines hammering steel is like thinning out a hard pillow. That gets him through the day, and as a reward, he hands you 2 Master's Armorer hammers and 2 repair tongs. For fun, if you were to speak with Bowles, he comments on how good of a worker Théoden is. The only thing though is that he doesn't stop talking about pillows. With that, thus ends the quest, The Smith's Apprentice. The next quest up for discussion today is the Barbarian and The Book. This one begins with the player in the Godsreach section of Mournhold. Wandering around, you're likely to happen across a Nord named Thrud. Thrud opens up asking if you've seen someone named Dilborn. He's been missing for 3 days, and it makes Thrud sad. Apparently, Dilborn is a powerful wizard who's read books to Thrud in the past. With him gone, there's no one to read to Thrud. He asks if you can help in locating his friend. Agreeing, Thrud says that he last saw Dilborn going into the sewers to meet with some quote-unquote friends. Traveling to the residential sewers entrance, I personally forgot that I had aggroed onto more than a few goblins and then left the sewers in a hurry. So, Thrud and I were met with a shock as we descended down. After getting slaughtered, I decided to go back down there before speaking with Thrud and take care of the attackers. Once that was over with, I collected Thrud again and somehow lost him on the way down there. Regardless, pretty much right after the sewer entrance, the player is likely to see a group of 4 men standing in a small section. Getting in close, you'll spot a naked hostage who appears to be Dilborn, standing amongst 3 thugs. Dilborn simply asks for help, and the 2 goons in the back tell you to speak with the boss, Drathis. Drathis says he knew someone was going to come looking for Dilborn. Any attempts made on his life will result in the death of the wizard. Apparently, Dilborn has some debts that need to get paid off, and Drathis says that the 2 of you may be able to work something out. Dilborn has racked up a gambling debt of 3,000 gold, and if you pay it off for him, Drathis will let him go. There are a few prompts at this point in the quest. Asking for his ransom to get lowered could result in Drathis taking off 2,000 drakes worth of his debt. This only works though if his disposition is high enough. Otherwise, you can choose to pay off the entire ransom yourself, or tell him to prepare for battle. Luckily, after Drathis denied the request to have the amount lessened, I was able to back out of the conversation and prepare for the fight. This part was certainly a little tricky to nail down. Drathis was the biggest problem out of the 3 goons. He has a sword that paralyzes the player, and that would just lead to more headaches, potions, and troubles if he was left alive throughout the whole fight. So, my plan was to cast a destruction spell that would kill him instantly. Doing so, it worked, but the remaining 2 enemies did exactly as they were told, and attacked Dilborn instead of me. The wizard lasted for a little bit during this fight, but not long enough for me to kill the 2 attackers. I retried this fight several times, unable to kill everyone in time to save Dilborn, so I decided to leave, stock up on magicka potions in order to cast my death spell twice, regain the company of Thrud for some extra manpower, and switch to a spear that actually had decent condition to it. For this run, I cast my frost spell on Drathis, killing him instantly. I chugged a potion of Restore Magicka, killing one of the henchmen right away as well, and then together with Thrud and Dilborn, we slew the last attacker. Looting the bodies for some decent gear, the player can now speak with the wizard. He thanks you for your efforts and says that because of his financial circumstance, he's unable to reward you for his rescue. Speaking with Thrud instead, he's ecstatic to have his friend back and gives you his favorite book called Trap. Reading it, it increases your sneak skill by 1 point. With that, thus ends the quest, The Barbarian and The Book. The next quest is titled The Thief. This one begins with the player entering inside of the Sadri Manor within the God's Reach district. Descending to the lower level and speaking with Golena Sadri, she'll act hostile towards you, accusing you of being one of them. She says that you'll never get your hands on it and that it's safe from the likes of you. She ends by telling you to get out. Confused, you turn to the person standing next to her, Alvin Laris. He apologizes for Golena's behavior, as apparently she lashes out at just about everyone. No one knows what it is or why she's so protective over it. She gets violent when any of this is brought up, but Alvin feels bad for leaving her alone. He does have some sort of lead though, as she recently visited with Albert Nermark at the Craftsman Hall. He's the enchanter there, and Alvin thinks it's worth paying him a visit. Doing so, Albert can be found in the upper levels of the hall, tucked away inside one of the rooms. When Golena is brought up, he has a brief moment of panic. He refuses to see her again, as last time, things ended poorly. She apparently came by to discuss enchantments, but soon asked Albert to take a look at some devices. In doing so, Albert went to her home and discovered about a dozen or so dwarven contraptions. He got in closer to take a better look when, all of a sudden, one of them shocked him. His injuries were bad, and Golena stood next to him, laughing. She declared that they weren't strong enough and chased him out of the house, claiming him to be a spy. Leaving the Craftsman Hall and attempting to return back to Sadri Manor, you'll notice that the door is now secured by a level 90 lock. Casting a spell or picking it to get inside, the upstairs area is void of life. By descending to the lower level, you'll notice that the guard from before is dead, and everyone else is nowhere to be seen. In the corner of the room, you'll spot a hatch leading into the sewers. Going into it, just beyond the entrance, there lies the corpse of Tadera Andulis, one of the visitors of Sadri Manor. Beside her body is a door that leads into a zone called the Forgotten Sewers. Inside, there's a medium-sized room with a crater in the center of it. The crater contains a plethora of crates, each containing some gold. At the back of the room, the player can turn a crank which raises the water level. The crates rise with the water, and below their previous location, you'll notice another hatch leading further into the sewers. This next area is brief, but if you don't have any sort of breathing enchantment, you'll have to work fast. On the other side of this passageway, there's another crank the player can turn. Doing so, the water level goes back down, and you progress even further into the sewers. This next zone is your final destination. There are a series of pathways that lead through a small cave system. Periodically, along the pathway, you'll run into the dwarven contraptions that Albert was talking about. They'll cast powerful destruction spells on you, and if you're not careful, they have the power to kill you quickly. Making it through all of the traps, the player will find themselves standing before a large room. In it, you'll spot Golena, and getting too close to her, she'll shout at you, saying that she's already gotten rid of the others, and that no one will take it from her. She becomes hostile and then attacks. She fights with a Daedric bow for distance, and uses the Mace of Slurring for close combat. She can prove to be pretty challenging, so the player should ready themselves with the necessary equipment. Once she's defeated, you can access her inventory and take her powerful gear. The Mace of Slurring is one of the artifacts that the museum is looking for, so it can be traded in for a lot of gold. If you choose to explore, there's a small nook that contains chests with high-level loot. The problem is that they're guarded by the Dwemer constructs, and attempts at grabbing them are highly dangerous. Exiting the Forgotten Sewers and running back out into the center of God's Reach, you'll happen across Alvin, who is still very much alive. He asks for news, and the player informs him of Galena. He's shocked and saddened to hear about all of the death. Alvin recognizes, though, that Galena was too far gone, and that you did what had to be done, thus ending the quest, The Thief. The next quest for today is titled The Warlords. This one begins with the player entering inside of the vacant manor within God's Reach. Descending down to the lower level, you'll come across a strange sight. There are 3 Dwemer congregating in a small area. Approaching the one in the front, Dwemer Warbots, he says that you have no business being here, and that it's best you leave ASAP. Trying to ask about their business, Dwemer says that he doesn't recall inviting you here and that you can't be trusted. Raising his disposition and trying again, he's more forthcoming this time and spills the beans. The 3 of them are looking out for their future. They recognize the turmoil and tensions between the temple and the monarchy. They want to be prepared for when civil war breaks out in Mournhold. They're allegedly stockpiling for that, and Dwemer asks you to assist them. Inquiring about how, Dwemer says that they know what they need, but the means in which they would obtain them likely won't fly with the local guard. He specifically calls out someone by the name of Soshin, as he's jealous at his ability to strut the streets and no one bats an eye at him. Soshin has apparently only gotten to where he is now by committing horrible acts and deeds, yet Dwemer says everyone just dismisses them. The quote-unquote tools that he has on him are exactly what Dwemer needs, and he asks the player to get them for him. Accepting the offer, Orin says that you need to bring him Soshin's sword and cuirass, and you need to obtain them through whatever means necessary. You're directed over to the Wing Gwar and head there right away. In the lower level of the tavern, Soshin can be found wandering about. Attempting to speak with him, he'll dismiss you right away, saying that he's busy. This makes it tricky to provoke him into a fight. Some suggested methods include casting a frenzy spell, isolating him inside of a room, or just simply tanking the bounty and paying off the murder fine. Regardless of how you do it, once the gear is obtained, the player can return back to Dwemer and hand him the cuirass and sword. He says that these will be used to fight against Mournhold's oppressor. You receive a reward of 5,000 gold, and Dwemer asks if you want to further assist their cause. Humoring him, he says that Felvin is also in need of new equipment, and directs you to the Dwemer in the back. Felvin is considerably less confident and seems rather timid. He ultimately calls out the Altmer, Elinande, saying that she has gear that could be useful for him, particularly her axe and robe. Felvin finishes with saying that Dwemer told him that she doesn't deserve the gear and that they're better suited for him. Elinande can be found right behind the stretch of manors on the western side of God's Reach. Trying to speak with her, she says she's waiting for someone and dismisses you the exact same way that Soshin did. Again, casting Frenzy or tanking the murder fine, the player fights and defeats the High Elf, taking her robe and axe. Bringing them to the vacant manor and handing them to Felvin, he asks if she was willing to give them up that easily, and then clues in that she was killed for them. He's bothered by the means of which the gear was acquired, but copes by saying that Dwemer says everyone else is a bad person, and that the 3 of them are actually doing good work. He rewards you with 1,000 gold, and you speak once more with Orin. Asking of how you can be of further assistance, he directs you over to the 3rd member, Olvin Dobar. She's blunt with her words, but knows what she wants. Talking with Olvin, she too seems a little timid and shy with her request. She wants Bel's Uvenom's gear, but doesn't want to be filled in on how you're going to get them for her. The player runs over to the Temple District and spots Bel's on the northwestern side. He too refuses to talk, and that's when you do whatever is necessary to get the items. Once Uvenom is dead and you have the spear and helmet, you can return back to Olvin, who's obviously disturbed by the whole situation. She's even disgusted and thrown off by the remaining blood on the helmet. She rewards you with 1,000 gold, and it's back to Dwemer one more time. He thanks you for everything that you've done for them so far, and he says they're so close to starting work on their greater purpose. He asks for one last favor of you. Soldreni Solandis, an NPC in town, is considered a threat. This is due to her mindset of bowing down to whoever's in charge. Sildreni is a danger to their cause, and Dover needs you to obtain her mace and amulet. Celandis can be found within the Great Bazaar. Heading there and speaking with her, she says she isn't feeling very talkative and asks to be left alone. Provoking her by whatever means necessary and killing her, the player can take her amulet and mace. Bringing them to Dover, he's ecstatic with your accomplishments. He rewards you with 4,000 gold and says that it's time for the three of them to get to work. This is one way in which the quest can end, but there are two other outcomes that could also occur. The first and most direct one is by killing all three of the warlords before the assassinations begin. This puts an abrupt end to the questline. The other way can only be explored after Elinande has been killed and her gear given to Felvin. If his disposition is raised high enough, he'll tell you in confidence that he's scared. Felvin comes clean and says that Dover did some real bad things to get his current wealth and power. However, the other two are hardly innocent, as they also partook in the crimes. He's scared for where this is all headed and questions if they're just as bad as the people that Dover said are ruining the town. Felvin wants to get out of here, but is afraid of what Oren will do to him. The player can tell him that it's best to turn himself in to the authorities. He agrees, but mentions that he may not be strong enough to stand up to Dover. Exiting the conversation, Olvine will have overheard the two of you and bullishly ask if you're both scared. In a moment of transparency though, she reveals that she's also frightened about the whole situation. You tell her that she should also turn herself in, and that gives her the courage and confidence to think straight. She says she'll speak with Felvin after you leave. The player exits the manor and enters back inside. You'll hear a grunt coming from the basement, and upon going down there, you'll see the corpse of Dover. The other two, however, are nowhere to be found. Venturing off to the jail area of the royal palace, you can actually find both Felvin and Olvine have been locked away. Felvin remarks at how they were able to escape the situation, and that they left your name out of the whole thing. He also says that he hopes Dover is okay, as Olvine hit him in the head really hard and knocked him down. As for Olvine, she just says that she wants to distance herself from this dilemma as much as possible. With that, thus ends the quest, The Warlords. The next quest for today is titled The Black Dart Gang. This one begins with the player wandering through the bazaar sewers just beneath the Great Bazaar. On the western end, just before the gates leading into the Manor District, the player will come across an NPC named Nerissa Addis. Nerissa will warn you of the Black Dart Gang. She explains that they ambushed her and her lover, Veriner, within the temple sewers. Veriner fought them off while she fled, resulting in his death. She sees his ghost at night, and it tells her to come and rescue him. His spirit apparently has a message for her, but Nerissa is too afraid to delve back down there as she doesn't want to happen across the Black Dart Gang. You ask if there's anything you can do to help, and she stares at you for a bit. She breaks the silence by saying that you're no match for them. Their darts are too deadly to deal with, but she says that if you happen across Veriner's spirit, you should speak with it, as to learn what it needs from Nerissa. The temple sewers are best accessed through the basement section of the temple itself. After fighting through various forms of undead, the player wanders up the west passageway of the sewers and encounters Veriner's ghost. It's lingering in a small nook, and the ghost proclaims to have a message. It introduces itself as Veriner and goes on to say how the Black Dart Gang killed him. He wishes to be avenged, but says that they're all formidable opponents. Their hideout is in the temple sewers west, and lucky for you, Veriner knows of a secret trap within the chamber. There's apparently a mechanism that could instantly flood it, drowning anyone who dwells in there. Entering inside of the temple sewers west and meandering through the corridors, you'll come across two members of the gang. Attempting to fight them can be tricky, as they lob dangerous darts at you and have decent amounts of health. Just beyond them are two more members, all of which have the same set of skills. If the player wishes to forego personally defeating each target, the mechanism in which Veriner spoke of is right at the entrance to the zone. Activating it, water begins to rise in the tunnels, and soon completely overtakes anything and everything that's present. There are no air pockets to breathe from, rendering any humanoids or creatures dead. The kicker for this method though is that you'll likely need to lay eyes on each member's corpse. This is because otherwise, you may encounter a bug where Nerissa doesn't acknowledge their deaths, and therefore the quest isn't progressed. In order to locate their corpses, you may need an intense swift swimming spell or some form of water breathing. Once Verner has been avenged, the player can return back to Nerissa and she'll be in disbelief that the gang is dead. As a form of her gratitude, she hands you Verner's ring, which belonged to his family. If you tell her about Verner's ghost, she'll thank you for bringing her the message, and hope that Verner was able to pass on into the afterlife. Verner's ring is an enchanted piece of jewelry that has the effect of charm for up to 50 points for 5 seconds, thus ending the quest, the Black Dart Gang. The next quest for today is titled Wood Elf with a Grievance. This quest also takes place in God's Reach and starts with the player finding and speaking with a wood elf named High Pockets. He opens up by complaining about some so-called villainous clay-brained Nord in which he hates. He swears to get revenge on him, and digging a little bit further, apparently Holmar inside of the bar made a mockery of High Pockets. Pockets was minding his own business, in for a drink, when all of a sudden Holmar, unprovoked, started to make fun of him. This escalated into him assaulting Pockets and literally kicking him out of the bar. The Wood Elf proposes a plan to storm back inside of the tavern and teach Holmar a lesson. He asks if you'd be willing to help him out. Agreeing, he unsurprisingly asks your character to lead as you're bigger than he is. I didn't test it out, but I'd imagine he has slightly different dialogue if you're also playing as a Wood Elf. Entering inside of the Winged Guar, the player is likely to see Holmar wandering around the front area or the upper section of the tavern. Confronting him, Holmar is clearly very drunk, stumbling and slurring with his words. He pieces together some form of a sentence by asking you if this is about his recent encounter with High Pockets. He sees the Wood Elf right behind you and asks if he's back for more. This time he threatens both you and High Pockets, and you're given 3 different prompts. Telling Holmar to go home and sober up, he declines and says that High Pockets is looking at him funny, likely resulting in a hex towards him. The next prompt you can choose is offering to buy him some more drinks. He accepts, and this puts him over the edge, resulting in him passing out on the tavern floor. 60 gold is removed from your inventory, and High Pockets thanks you for your help. He says Holmar is the bar's problem now, and rewards you with 200 gold along with the Ring of Ice Grip. This enchanted ring deals frost damage and direct damage to health for 5 to 12 points for 1 second on touch. Alternatively, if the player chooses to challenge Holmar, he accepts and a literal fight to the death breaks out. He fights with his fists, and High Pockets helps out slightly in the battle by casting some spells. Once Holmar is dead, High Pockets rewards you with the same amount of gold and the same ring, ultimately apologizing for what you had to go through. Interestingly, there is a third and final outcome for this quest, which takes everything in a whole other direction. If the player goes and buys or retrieves Saryani's sermons before approaching High Pockets, a new dialogue pathway is opened up. When he speaks of getting revenge against Holmar, he mentions the sermons in the same thought, in which you can press further on. He notices the book in your inventory and comments on how it's very nostalgic for him. He asks to borrow the book, and if you let him, he says he's just going to read it for a bit and then hand it back over. All you need to do is enter inside of a new area, then come back out, and High Pockets will be naked. Speaking to him again, he says that the sermons have changed his life, and he no longer holds resentment against Holmar, and doesn't wish to carry around worldly possessions. As a thanks, he hands the book back over, along with the previous rewards, and all of his commoner clothing that he was just wearing. The conversation ends, and with that, so does the quest. The last quest for today is titled The Natural. This one begins with the player wandering through the temple courtyard. Standing just in between the gates of the royal palace and the temple doors, you'll come across a wood elf named Gaynor. Speaking with him, he politely greets you and introduces himself as an entrepreneur of sorts. Gaynor then asks for a small favor. Hearing him out, he says that he's down on his luck, and that he needs a little bit of gold to get his business venture going. He asks you for a 50 septim handout, and if the player agrees to it, the Bosmer will continue. Gaynor will grease you up, calling you a generous soul and that he can pay you back sooner rather than later. He asks for 100 gold this time, and if the player accepts, he pushes his luck even further. He remarks how the two of you are going to get along really well, and how nice of a person you are. He ends with asking you for a 1,000 gold handout. Indulging him further, he shows an even greedier side to him and says that since you have so much money to burn, what's another 10,000 gold? Granting him his wish, he's in awe at your generosity, stating that he'll never be able to pay you back. Gaynor jokes that you probably have 10 million septims on you, and that you're probably the richest of your race ever. Finally, he asks for a 1 million gold donation. Whether you have it or not and try to give it to him, Gaynor's demeanor changes real quickly. He switches from a starry-eyed weasel to a serious and hostile Bosmer. He asks if you think he's stupid and that no one in their right mind would have that much gold on them. He then claims that you're patronizing him. As the conversation ends, he eerily says that you and everyone will see what he's capable of. Even if the player refuses to give Gaynor any money at first, he's very insistent on receiving any kind of handout. He lowers it to 10 gold and becomes very blunt about getting what he wants. After refusing him several times, Gaynor becomes extremely hostile and upset. Apparently, nobody says no to Gaynor, and he won't forget this interaction. He promises that he'll get his payback. Leaving the scene and coming back, the Bosmer is nowhere to be found. Fast forward to 72 hours later, there's a wood elf in Gaynor's spot, marching around in a complete set of ebony armor, wielding an ebony sword and shield. Getting in closer, it appears to be the greedy wood elf, and he calls out to you. He says it's fate that you met like this again, and that in the brief time after your interaction, he's been busy. He's made the right friends, acquired the correct riches, and most of all, he's never lost a fight. He challenges the player to a duel by saying that his winning streak continues with you. Aside from his already overpowered armor set, Gaynor wears an amulet which boosts his luck by 15 points. On top of that, his base stats have increased, giving him 155 points to strength and 225 points to luck. Even worse, he has a natural ability which fortifies his luck by 500 points, resists magicka for 80 to 100 points, reflect for 50 to 100 points, and restore 1 health point per second. He's a very challenging opponent and is difficult to land hits on. Mages are likely to have an issue with facing him, and melee users may have to strap in for a lengthy match. His unusually high levels of luck give him the ability to land decent hits, and also allows him to dodge almost anything that's thrown his way. The unofficial Elder Scrolls wiki details a very clever and efficient way of defeating him. If the player needs a little extra help, the alcoholic drink of Sujamma can come in handy. By chugging multiple bottles of it, the player can drastically increase their strength level, ultimately being able to land extremely powerful melee hits. With a little bit of perseverance and a little bit of luck on your side, Gaynor's health can be whittled down and ultimately he's defeated. Once the wood elf is dead, you can loot him for his weapons, armor, and jewelry, thus ending the quest the natural. That concludes every single side quest featured in the Tribunal DLC for the Elder Scrolls 3 Morrowind. Which one was your favorite? Which one was the most difficult for you? Which one did you like, and which are the ones that you didn't? I really enjoyed Bouncer, Infidelities, The Thief, Crimson Plague, and A Star is Born. Let me know down below, and until next time, keep on adventuring.